Yep. What?
There are many other shows, and some of them were adapted once Power Rangers exploded with popularity. And we're here to discuss those fine programs. Shows with metal people in them.
Metal Hero wins.
Countless metal people. And we have many guests from those various shows here today. Heroes, villains, and everything in between. I think they should introduce themselves, I guess. So here they are. We'll start with the man.
Tony Oliver.
Yeah, I think you can
I'll go on this side.
What did I say?
Tony Oliver, writer on Ameritoku Power Rangers. I made suggestions on Ameritoku, that was about it.
I'm Brad Hawkins. I was the voice of the Gold Ranger on Power Rangers, and Ryan Steele on VR Troopers.
I'm Robert Hughes, and I directed the first season of Power Rangers, and then I produced and wrote and directed on VR Troopers. Then I produced Mask Rider, and I produced Beetleborgs, both seasons. And then I produced Mystic Knights of Junior.
That's totally fun. My name's Doug Sloan, and I produced Power Rangers for 4 years. Then I went, first I did VR Troopers with Bob. Bob gave me my first job. Thanks, buddy. My first directing, and he had to come save me. And then I went on to do Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder down in New Zealand.
Check. My name is Marshall Hamilton. I played Les Fortunes on Beetleborgs Metallics.
Yep.
And that guy right there hired me, and he's responsible for it.
Hi, my name is Christopher Cho, and I produced nothing. I was Nugas on the Beetleborgs and Beetleborg Metallics, and I was the voice of Dark Spectre in Power Rangers Express.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Troy Slayton. I played Amp Ear on Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad.
Hey guys, how you doing? My name is Matt Mullins. I played Len, Kamen Rider Wing Knight on the Kamen Rider Dragon Knight series. And outside that world, I played Johnny Cage in the Mortal Kombat Legacy series.
So if anybody has questions for these amazing people, by all means step up. But I'm going to break the ice a little bit, and I'm going to throw this out. This may be controversial. I always thought the Beetleborgs villains were scarier than Power Rangers villains. Throw that out.
Oh, yeah.
It may be controversial, I know. I didn't know what these guys were going to do when, Les drawing stuff, and then Nugas, when you burned up the comics, how were they going to send you back? I didn't know. It's scary. I don't even want to think about that. Let's just move on. All right, first up.
Hello, all. I am very happy that there's a panel about this because the majority of the U.S. populace just think there's Power Rangers, not anything else, So, okay, so my question is for Troy. I recently rewatched Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad.
Was that on DVD?
Yes, I bought it on DVD.
Oh, okay, good, thank you. So I guess you and I were probably the only ones that did that.
I did. It was on sale, yes. Rewatching it, I never knew this, but how come you left the show, or what was the circumstance, and did you know that your character was an alien?
Okay, so several questions.
Several questions.
Let's start with the last one first.
Okay.
I did not know that my character was an alien. That was the way to say goodbye to me at the end of my run. If you want to really get into the weeds, the inside baseball, it was that they wanted me to sign a 5-year deal. The show only went, I think, 1 season, but they wanted me to agree to a 5-year deal, and I didn't, and they said goodbye. But the run that I did have was awesome and super fun.
Yes. Thanks.
All right. Nice to see you guys all here and all, but my question is, why didn't you just ever steal a copying machine for less? I think
Steal the copy machine.
There wasn't any electricity in the cave.
Oh, right. For Kamen Rider, have you guys heard of the newest one that came out with this? Was that, at the time you were making Dragon Knight, did you guys hear about this? And if you did, why did you put it in?
We did not hear about Abyss. I mean, for our series, we just had that one particular series. We didn't go outside of the source material that was already given, so at the time, that's all we had.
Ah, okay.
Nick. Nick.
My first question is, have any of the actors themselves ever watched any of their predecessor shows? You know, Space Sheriff, B-Fighter, Ryuki, Ultraman.
Well, actually, Superhuman Samurai was based on Gridman.
Yes,
I believe Gridman, but no. Before I did it, I didn't see any of that, but subsequent, I got to see the source material, what it was based on. And in fact, we actually stole all of the footage. It was cut in. We only shot the live action stuff. Everything else was from the original Gridman.
You basically watched the entire series.
For Kamen Rider, for Ryuki, I had a chance to catch up with it after we ended up shooting. I mean, for the tonality, I had a chance to look at a little bit of it, but I didn't want to grab too much from the original show for the Len character in that.
Yeah, and great question. Yeah, I mean, I became a fan of it because I wanted to educate myself on the show that we were using the footage for. So Metallic was our first season. That's still that's probably my favorite because it was still my first season on the show. And then second season we switched over to Space Sheriff Shiner, which, like I said in the panel earlier, was cool for me because I got all new cool stuff. I got all new weapons and new the bikes and all that stuff. So I was excited that I got new tricks.
And the second question, a lot of people in our little Kamen Rider community have really said that Kamen Rider, Dragon Knight was the first Kamen Rider done right here in America, so... So I wanted to say, what are your thoughts on that? Because the other one was Masked Rider, and you actually got its name back, you had the rider kicks and everything, so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
My thoughts were that the show ended up trying to go another direction that maybe the U.S. audiences weren't ready for yet. As you got into like Batman, going back to like the gritty original feeling of what the show was supposed to be and those comics were supposed to be, I feel that Kamen Rider was trying to do that, but perhaps a little bit ahead of its time. So even though it was something that at the time, like we thought was, very revolutionary to what had been done, it just was a little bit too far forward for it to take off as well as we would have hoped.
So what, Debbie? Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Masked Rider is awesome. Okay, just saying that right now. Just saying. Hail Furbus. But this is a question just for the whole panel, so you each can give your individual thoughts. What's one moment, story, anything that really encapsulates your time on, one of the shows you worked on, or any of the shows you worked on? Just one memory that really, you look back and it's like, yeah, that was it. Or just one favorite.
Pretty good, yeah. The guy with the longest have to remember it. I don't know. I think it wasn't so much doing the show, because doing the show, I've been a professional for a long time, so doing a show wasn't a unique thing for me, but seeing the reaction out in the audience. So I think the moment for me was when the Power Rangers made their first live appearance at Universal Studios, and 50,000 people showed up. I was out in an audience of 6,000 people. We had 6 shows of 6,000 each. And to watch them screaming and hollering and girls yelling, Tommy! And to see that impact, Tommy.
Not Tony.
Yeah, because they always yell for the writers, We had to do something. So, no, but to see that moment and just to get that was the moment when it really hit me, the impact
leaves. If everybody knows who's seen the show, I wear a vest in every single episode. So he keeps the tradition alive. Well, I mentioned the panel earlier today that the moment for me, and we did a live show, not on the to the degree that Power Rangers live show was, but we had I want to say, what was it, 2 back-to-back days of sold-out shows at Universal Studios for Ameritoku 1. Yeah, I injured myself in the second show, and that was terrible. But it was like 5,000 people per show, and when you're standing in Universal Studios, and I think there's 5,000 seats there, and you're just like, everybody there knows who you are. It is overwhelming. I mean, just you realize this thing is worldwide, and it's massive, and you're a piece of that puzzle and part of that legacy. That was just humbling and very grateful.
It was almost just shy of what Power. It's such a bitch because I was going to say the same thing. Because you work in vacuum in television, you never get the feedback. When suddenly you're in front of an audience, and as we were saying here, it was like the best day and the worst day. Because we're in front of an audience and everybody's reacting and it's great. But there was a terrible injury and a knee got blown out, and we had to compensate that for weeks on set because Brad hurt himself doing a flip. And so it was very tough. But since they used that, I won't use that. And I'll say one of my favorite times that I remember from the show, it was St. Patrick's Day, I guess about 1997. And I was pitching Mystic Knights of Chernobyl. And I wanted to do that show so bad. And I'd been asked to do something that was mythological, but not Greco-Roman. Because Hercules and Xena were really popular at the time, and they didn't know what else to do. I was brought up, a Catholic kid, and Irish Catholic, and I had all this background of Celtic mythology, and I wanted to put it to use, so I made this pitch, and I sold it on St. Patrick's Day, and it's like, bingo.
I would have loved to Tulane, but oh well.
That's huge. I guess my best moment is very weird, but my first job in this was Jason Frank's acting coach. And the first time he knocked on my door, I opened the door, and there's this kid who had never done a lick of acting in his life. And they had sent me to him to coach him up to be things you were directing. And it was like, I was, terrified I wasn't going to get him to do what he did, but, after that session, it was like, okay, he's going to be okay, he's going to be fine. That was to me, like, that was the beginning of my career in Power Rangers and all this stuff. So that was a cool moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back of my achieving moment. It was one season, and it was so fast. There's a couple of things. One of them, I think you had some kids that came into one of the scenes. Marching Times, or one of the charities that you were involved with, and we were shooting the comic book store scene. And all these kids sitting along the side of the wall, and they were going to watch the entire scene. And I hadn't really done a lot of kid show stuff, and it was a completely different world. So there was probably 10 or 15 little faces to the side of this comic book store, and I had to go run through this comics. I was throwing comics off shelves and just acting like an idiot. And I remember running over to him, and I slid on these shoes. You had those tennis shoes, those hard-soled tennis shoes that I could slide on. It's kind of like one of those crater ones. And I slid over, and they were all standing in front of me, and I just did something really crazy. And they all just started over. And they had these big eyes and this big smile on their face. And I kind of started to understand who the audience was, I'd say the second one was the first one of these I did, this first convention. And you look really familiar. Were you here last year? Mm-hmm. You were here last year?
Yeah.
Okay. I've told a story about you to a bunch of people. I'm going to tell you how what I mean with that. You've grown since the last time I saw you. You were shorter. I remember you.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Zach.
Zach. The first convention, I didn't really understand the length of what we had, and I think people would come at me from MySpace and Facebook, and all these people were coming from all over the world. Hey, were you the guy? And you don't really know what the reach is when you're inside the show doing it. You're just doing the show from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. You're driving home. You don't really. And when I started seeing the people here, 15 years later or 20 years later, that are still fans of it, and there's a bunch of them. That was amazing. I mean, that was really cool. When I saw you last year, you were telling me all about the show. And you're just your dad, right? I remember you were standing behind him and you had a big smile on your face, like you knew what the show was. And I was trying to figure out how your son knew so much about the dang show because he wasn't born when we shot him. And you were launching into telling me about the magnivores and all the crustaceans and all this stuff that frankly I don't remember. And I asked you, well, how do you know so much about the show? You weren't born. And you had this funny look on your face. When I said you weren't born, it's like you didn't understand. And you said, Netflix. All right? And I told the story a lot of times because what it represents is that 20 years after the fact almost, Netflix is bringing you back to us. And you weren't even born. So it's bringing in this whole new audience to the show. And you thought that we were still filming the show. You did, I remember. Yes, you said
Your girl me was stupid.
That's kind of one of those things where, we have legs. We have some legs in that. It was really, really cool. Thank you. Yeah, pretty much what you said.
I would have to say probably while we were doing the show, I didn't realize really what we were doing. I'm guilty of being like the guy who did Wolverine, Hugh Jackman. They said he didn't know anything about Wolverine when he went to audition, and I was like really pissed. It's like, how do you go audition for Wolverine and I know who he is? Well, I'm guilty of the same thing because when I was auditioning for Nukas, I had no idea who he was. I didn't know that comic strip was going on in Japan and everything, so I was totally oblivious. But then years later, when people started hunting me down on Facebook, saying, oh my God, I love that show, you were so cool, you were such a cool villain. That was really satisfying. It was really kind of cool to hear people recognize the work that we did, years ago. So I'd say that's probably the thing that I took away from that show.
I started acting when I was 5 years old. I was on several different shows in the 80s and 90s. Before I did Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, I was on a show called Cagney and Lacey that your moms watched for about 8 years, from 1980 to 88. I did a show called Parker Lewis Can't Lose. I played Jerry Steiner, the nerdy Jewish kid. Huge stretch. I don't know how I got that role. But what's crazy is the reason why I bring that up is not just to toot my own horn. You can check me out on IMDb and see that. Is because to this day, when people do come up to me or in the random event where I get some sort of email on Facebook or something like that, they're mentioning Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad. Not all the other, Fox was a big show, Parker Lewis was a big show on Fox, a major network, and Superhuman Samurai was a Saturday morning, essentially kid show. And that is what people recognize me more from than from anything else. And so that's kind of amazing. And then I go into the exhibit hall here, and yesterday, I didn't think that there would be anything from the show. And there's one of the action figures, one of the vehicles from the show, and it's selling for $200 in the box. I couldn't believe that. So it's very shocking to me, and I'm glad that we still continue to entertain people. And the DVD came out, and I hear some people out here have actually bought it, and that's great. So I'm glad that we are coming out and being introduced to new audiences and new people.
You're wishing you didn't open up your toy. I saw boxes of that stuff in my garage.
Oh,
Dusty scripts.
Very, very similar. What I experienced and took away the most from the show is just how transcendent Kamen Rider was. It was to be part of that franchise that had been going on for so long, and for it not just to be something that, even though it wasn't as accepted as well here in America, everywhere else in the world it was huge. I went down to an event called SuperCon down in Brazil, and there was 30,000 people that were just there to watch clips from the show, and it was just a small panel, but it was incredible and something that was outstanding. Personally, for me though, because Kamen Rider was always like the little engine that could. It was always a show that had a lot of things that was trying to pull it back. Because it wasn't, nobody knew exactly what it was in America. Everyone knew that it wasn't going, it's like, well, it's like, how do you describe Kamen Rider? Like, well, it's Power Rangers, but it's a little different. It's like, it's kind of the same thing, but it's a little different. That's how people were looking at it. So we were always having a lot of things to fight against, but everybody's on the crew's cast and production, they worked at it so hard, and it's like, it was a big family for us. And even myself, when I went for my auditions, I couldn't get an audition. I couldn't get it to my agent, I couldn't get it to my manager. I couldn't even find out where it was. And I found out where it was, I crashed the audition, got the pre-show pilot. The pre-show pilot got canceled, then it went to a series, then that got shut down, and then it had to get picked up. And all these little tiny things, they were trying to drag it back. But eventually, it got on the air and it ended up inspiring and making other people feel just like I did when I watched Power Rangers for the first time. So it was a pretty remarkable experience and something that I'll never forget and very, very proud to be a part of.
Thank you very much.
Good question.
All right, so my questions are for Matt. How did you get into Dragon Knight? Like, how did you find the show and stuff and so forth?
Just like I just said, pretty much. I heard about it was actually kind of funny. I read, they had these things called breakdowns that you could find out what's being cast in Hollywood, and I was able to, through a game of chance, I acquired one of these so-called breakdowns. And they're looking for a character for Len, and it was like 6'1", dark hair, dark eyes, does really good at martial arts, and has the potential to be a badass. Kind of like Neo from the Matrix, but a little cooler. And I was like,
that's how they sound.
I think, yeah. So okay. And he has to be humble too. So, so I'm like, yeah, I think I can do that. So this was before like there was stuff around, but it was hard to find out where it was, and I ended up finding out about it. And I did the research that I could do to figure out about the series and what I could. And I just tried to bring all that to the character, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that.
And were there ever any talks about doing a season 2 or adapting any other series or anything like that?
At the time, what they actually had as far as the licensing rights went, it was only to Ryuki. So there were talks, if it was going to go into a second season, it would have been a continuation of that same story. So it would not have gone to another Kamen Rider series, it would have been a continuation of that. Which would have been really cool because, as it was, even though we repurposed a lot of the footage from Ryuki, we ended up shooting amazing footage in America of action that I was really blown away by. It was a really awesome way. It was some of the best visual effects, especially at the time that were going on television, I felt. Especially daytime television. So, it would have been really cool to see what we would have done from scratch, from nothing, and go on from there. But there were talks, yes, it just never materialized.
Thank you. No problem.
Hey, I'm wondering what kind of process went into deciding what tokusatsu shows you guys were going to adapt and why you chose the ones you did. If you had any say in that.
When we started, it was whatever Chaim bought. The company Chaim Saban basically was a Japan file and go and research shows, and that's where he found Zhu Rangers, which is when Power Rangers came up. He actually found Metalder first. In fact, I did a weird version of it called Metalhead, which was kind of like What's Up Tiger Lily. That we tried to sell to MTV, and then we gave that footage to Bob, who actually made something somebody actually wanted to watch. But mostly it was what, here, what can you make of this? And that's pretty much the way it was said to us. And I think Cybertron.
As many of you know, there was originally a pilot called Cybertron, which was based solely on Metallica. And Jason Frank was playing the role. And it was interesting because this was not a Fox Kids show. This was going to be a syndicated show, and it wasn't a Bandai license, it was a Hasbro license. So this was going to be very different. And because it was syndicated, it could be much more violent. You know, they could lop off arms and kick people in the heads, which it tested better than the pilot for Power Rangers.
By a lot.
But because it was so fun. And I guess the thing about it was the toy companies that are associated with these shows are all powerful. They are the tails that wag the dogs. And in this case, having a single hero was not going to make it in the toy store. They needed more characters in the show. So that was the reason that another show was licensed with 2 additional characters, and that was Skillon, and which could be combined so that now there was more shelf space and more product. And if you remember, halfway through the VR Troopers series, we added an element that was called the Battle Grid. And it was just a sort of random go fight some more in a virtual space. And the thing that was, the reason that this happened was because Hasbro needed to create more toys and some more costumes. And you will see this pattern in every one of these shows, that whether it's an upgrade of the weapon or the uniform or whatever, that this is yet another toy line being rolled out. So the toy line really controls how these shows get made. But to Tony's point, you know, it was Chaim making the deals with Bandai and Toei, who was the original producers, to figure out what the potential was for an American audience.
I just want to check. I'm glad, because I'm learning as well. I didn't know how that process went. And I had no idea why we were Battle Grid either.
It was going to work.
I was so confused about the Battle Grid as well. This is just a day of just relief. We can finally sleep easy about that. We got about 15 minutes left, so if you have any burning Ameritoku questions, ask now.
Okay, so this is a question for everybody on the panel who probably didn't work on Master Rider. I just want your opinion on something really quick. I want to know what you think this thing is. What do you all think this little guy is?
Definitely a bobblehead.
Well, it's a Verbus, isn't it? Yes. Interesting fact about Verbus, I don't know how many people know this, but Vern Troyer, Mini-Me, played Verbus. He was inside the costume.
And he had the hugest truck you've ever seen.
He had a ladder.
Yeah, he climbed a ladder to get into. He pulled up in this truck pulled into the parking lot, like literally, that I could not have gotten up into. And and it stopped, and out comes Vern Troyer. It was awesome.
Now it's left just for purpose to use this.
Again, I have a question for the entire panel. What was it like? You know, Power Rangers was really big when all these other shows started to come up. So, what was it? How did you approach these shows? Did you try to do something similar to Power Rangers, or did you try to really, you know, get away from what you had been doing with Power Rangers? And sort of, what was the process like of creating all these new shows after the success of Power Rangers?
You were really believing all that.
Well, I can only say that you couldn't have a better model. You know, because Power Rangers was awesome, and I loved working with Power Rangers, and I learned so much, and that's why I got the job to make these other shows, and learning how to adapt the footage and so forth. But, you know, it's funny when people think about shows like Kamen Rider or about Mystic Knights or whatever as spin-offs of Power Rangers. Because Power Rangers is a spin-off. You know, it is not an original show. I mean, it's original in our market, but we're working with material that was adapted for an American audience. So the big lesson that we were taking was from the Japanese filmmakers themselves, because they knew how to do it, and they'd been doing it for so many years before we ever got our hands on it. We would study the footage and realize how they used snap zooms to get out of shots where people landed, transfer them to another place, or the way they used associative editing to link scenes up between the costume characters and the actors. And, so we have a lot to learn from them. In fact, in the middle of the first season, we got some footage about the making of, it was behind the scenes reel of the making of Ranger. And it was an education because their crew was so Spartan. And they were all the actors were carrying their own costumes and taking care of hauling equipment, and they worked with a tiny crew and shot shots that were like 3 seconds long and then cut, and 3 seconds long and cut, shooting sequence, and we learned from them.
Thank you.
Hello, this is a question for you about AR Troopers on, I'm sure you've heard this a lot about how come it was in the third season, because it was a lot of footage, you know, from other space sheriff. But my theory is probably because of Caitlin, there was not another female footage they could do. Am I right?
Well, you know, I think it goes back to my earlier point about toy sales. Because you could have a show like this and get good ratings, but if you're not selling toys, there's no show. And to be honest, I don't think Hasbro was getting the return on their investment.
I'm sorry to stop you, but I believe it was Kenner.
Well, Kenner is owned by Hasbro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my thought, is that the toy sales sort of the end of the show. Because as you say, there were other shows that were drawn from. A lot of other material.
I kept hearing it was a hit. So.
And the other thing was that, you know, if you had taken those toy sales back, not comparing them to Power Rangers, it probably would have been a significant, decent little
I agree with that.
pop. But Power Rangers selling billions of dollars worth of toys, and that's what they were looking for, the next $1 billion franchise, and it just, you know, never happened.
I'll tell you a really weird story was Beetleborgs, because it was a certifiable hit. You know, you had first season, second season, and it was ready to go to third season. But the footage that the Japanese did was so, it was really infantile. It was like Teletubbies.
Yeah, I know. Hobo Time.
Yeah. Comic Time. And we're all looking at this, including Bandai America, is looking at this going, how could you do this to us? We're left, you know, with nothing, we could not go forward.
Well,
and Bandai America was just, their minds were blown. You know, but we learned that the Japanese filmmakers and Bandai Japan were going to do whatever they were going to do. You know, and as you know from working on Power Rangers, there was not a lot of cooperation.
Yeah, you would have meetings with them before the season, before they would shoot their next season, and you say, can you please cover up their faces, you know, this thing, and can you not have the villains talking? Oh, of course, absolutely, yes, we'll do that for sure, definitely, no problem. And then you get the footage, and it would be exactly the opposite of what you're talking about. You're like, whoa, did we lost in translation? What happened? And what we came to realize was they were not going to let you tell them how to make the show that they'd been making for 25 years. I mean, it was their thing, their deal, they knew how to do it. And, you know, they were just feeding us 52 episodes a year and charging us whatever.
It's like the point you made in the last panel that it's expensive to do the Zord footage and all the other stuff, rather just stay with it. So,
yeah,
I mean, like the third season of Beetleborgs that you guys made.
Yeah.
Of fans who want.
Yeah, there was talk of that, you know, there was always talk of, we're going to do it ourselves. And then they ran the numbers and it made no sense to do it themselves. You know, Disney, when I was at Disney doing Dino Thunder and Ninja Storm, you know, they had a Disney, Gary Marsh came in and said, what do you think about doing our own? And I said, fine, run the numbers and not doable. So that's sort of what has kept the franchise going for so many years.
Thank you for
Actually, just out of curiosity, do you guys know why? Why was the deal for VR Troopers with Hasbro and not Bandai? Is there a reason they turned that down? Or?
You know, these were older shows. This is like you're talking shows from 86, 87.
Yeah.
And they didn't see a value in it, and neither did Bandai. So Lion saw gold and said, I'll take it. And he had to go elsewhere for the toy line.
My question is kind kind of falls over that. So you were making a show called Cybertron with Hasbro, right? And Hasbro owns Transformers and has a planet called Cybertron. Was there a connection at all, or was there going to be a conflict?
No, but as you see, we didn't name the show Cybertron after all, did we? But I didn't think there was a conflict, and the legal department at Saban was very careful about.
There were a lot of them.
But ironically, the company name, because we always set up a separate company for each one of these productions, the company name for VR Troopers was Cybertron Incorporated.
And real quick, you ran out of footage for Big Bang Billboards, but there's a lot more tokusatsu out there now. Is anybody think about doing anything with those shows now?
Not me.
All right.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, good.
Okay, quick question. If you had the resources and connection to make whatever Ameritoku you want, what would you do to take it to the next level?
I think the next level would have to be to make a show coming from that style that is designed specifically for people who grew up on it but were no longer children. So basically taking that and deepening the stories, making it a little more violent, making it a little darker, and giving it some bite so that you have that kind of show, but it's really for adults. So a little more PG-13. That's what I would do.
That's pretty spot on. Yeah.
Well, to me, thank you very much.
Just letting everybody know we got about 5 minutes left. Lightning round, here we go.
The crew who worked on VR Troopers, I know about Cybertron was all ready to go, but JDF kind of backed out or had to back out. Don't you think Ryan Steele should have been Steelbond instead of Metallica? Steelbond kind of stole the show with that double-edged lightsaber thing. JD was kind of upstaging Ryan Steele, and all Ryan had was that dinky little karate
got real. Nick.
Yeah, a laser lance is what it was actually called. And if you were actually here to answer that question, I'm sure you would. So you got me. The good thing was there was a whole storyline with me and a singular and an individual sense with the storyline with the father as well, which tied into the Dark Heart series. There was that series, and then as far as my relationship with my missing father, all that tied together within that storyline. Whenever Spielman was out, you had JB and Caitlin, which they were always in together in fight scenes together. So it was always like, hey, let's go defeat that villain. You guys go that way, I'm going this way. So, you know, and when you look at the footage, those explosions, I don't think anybody on any of the Savant sets would have ever wanted to do any of those stunts. I mean, we're talking about a quarry and they're dropping just napalm. I mean, yeah, nobody wanted to be a part of that. And I think everybody's grateful that we got that footage. And I kind of like the boys.
But, okay, my first one is, since Japan is redoing a lot of their old Metal Hero stuff, does that spark an interest in redoing, like, maybe a continuation of VR, Troopers, or Big Bad Beetleborgs, some future sense, maybe?
I think you'd have to ask that question of Chaim Saban.
Well, I guess I can do that in my spare time.
You can find it.
And my other question was about when I said about the Abyss thing earlier, I meant, could you have gotten the suit like what you did with Onyx? I mean, Onyx.
Can you say that question again?
Earlier I asked about the Abyss and why it wasn't he bought Dragonite. I think you misheard me when I was asking. Couldn't you do the same thing like you did with Onyx? Because when he was showing the ring, he didn't have a lot of screen time pretty much. And movies. I mean, heck, I would have preferred for a second season just like maybe I could be Abyss.
Well, somebody's got to step up.
and pay for it, first of all?
Look, the nature of the beast has changed. You're not going to get lightning to strike twice. And as good as these shows were, the way television functions now, the way the networks are structured, the advent of streaming content, and all that DVDs has changed stuff. It's changed a lot. And investing in a new show that's very Ranger-esque or VR Trooper-esque is a little risky at the moment. I think you'll see something like that eventually. But right now, as things change, I think you're gonna, Power Rangers still has to run its course. And you may see some rise and stuff. I'm noticing with Shuki Levy is doing a very Power Ranger-esque type of show right now that should be out in the fall sometime. So you're going to see more of stuff like that. But also with Netflix and these things bringing VR Troopers and Beetleborgs to, it may change things a little bit, but I think it'll be different than what you've seen before in terms of where it comes from and how it gets to
Well, as long as it gets done.
The demographic, I mean, I still work in kids TV, and the demographic has completely changed. I mean, when we were doing Power Rangers, the demo was 2 to 11. That's who watched our show, ages 2 to 11. And now, our top demo on our show that we do now for DreamWorks is 9 or 8. And it's a decently sophisticated show. So kids now who are 11 or 12 are going to see Iron Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, and watch Arrow on TV and stuff like that. It's a completely different deal. So if they were to redo it, I think, like you said, it would have to be, according to today's kid, which is a different thing. I mean, we love the
Maybe
charm.
6-minute streamed episodes. I mean, that would be about coming up with that.
And they don't. And
Here's another thing.
But they don't sell as many toys as they used to. I mean, our show now sells a gargantuan amount of toys for today, but by Power Ranger standards, it's 1% or 2%. Kids don't play with toys anymore.
And think about the fact that when you were kids and you were watching television, it was by appointment. You got up on Saturday morning and watched your cartoons. You can turn on Cartoon Network and watch cartoons all day long. You can see cartoons online. It's everywhere. It's a very different world.
I just want to say before we concluded, Brad, I thought your laser arm was really cool.
Thank you very
much. I couldn't let this conclude without that being
Lightning hand!
So, Laser Lance was supposedly it's a Darth Maul ripoff. It just happened to come 10 years earlier. But, I don't know how many years. Anyway, all right, thank you guys so much. It's been great.